debate should be decolonizing AIDS. Decolonizing debate is the process of creating safe space for alternative narratives that contradict narratives of power that render certain bodies, populations disposable, subject to extreme structural violence. But the truth is, in order to decolonize debate, we must prioritize impacts that address structural violence of marginalized populations. The A is not engaging in this impact framing inevitably justifies calculated logic, which makes entire populations invisible and unbelievable and should be rejected in all instances. But the third is that we inevitably carry our social location with us in round. This includes a significant amount of privilege as people with access to higher education. The A is that we should use the privilege to break down structures that create inequity. The fourth argument is that fairness is an arbitrary concept in debate that often excludes uncommon viewpoints and interpretations. The A is our interpretation of fairness is best attempts to address social and distributive inequity, which makes this concept inclusive. But the B argument is that this means procedurals are a secondary question because they reinforce normative understandings of fairness and replicate exclusion. The fifth argument is our use of the state actor not in endorsements of the previous interpretations or actions of that actor would attempt to radically reimagine the state. In debate, this is uniquely good for debate because over 50% of policymakers have some sort of debate background, which means imagining a state that acts to decolonize may increase the likelihood of a less violent state in the future. But the sixth argument is about functions of debate currency, determining which community norms and arguments are both ethically and strategically valuable. The A in casting your ballot, NAURS uses the debate currency to create safe norms of inclusion and safe space in debate. The background? The what is gun control legislation has been used as a guide to whiteness. The A is the Tyrard Amendment. Rhetoric specifically says that it helps the police against the so-called bad guys. Argument is that this narrative is usually synonymous with people of color. You can see on Stop and Frisk, the same narrative was used that we have to control gun legislation in order to stop risk. But if you look at the actual reports of Stop and Frisk, over 80% of the people who were stopped were people of color, and were actually less likely to carry weapons than white people. Was probably a reason as to why this is bad. But the B argument is that gun legislation becomes a way of constructing the other, specifically the way in which racially coded language such as threat or other words like that become synonymous with people of color. This ultimately means that the threat becomes justified, and we can justify atrocities on others because in the world we see them as threats and they're not a part of society, which means they become disposable and can be stopped as such as Stop and Frisk. The second argument is that gun control legislation has become politically controlled and concentrated. The A is that you can see how Senator Tyhart passed the legislation early on and left Congress in 2011, but this is still enforced, which means that in a world this is still enforced, you have to look back at exactly who wrote this bill. It's actually a bill that was written mostly by the NRA, which we will isolate as a bunch of right-wing nut jobs, but ultimately this is necessarily bad because it only shows that the politics is ultimately mixed with business, and in a world where business can influence politics, that means that the benefits or any of the good things only goes towards the way of the businesses and not the actual people, which means the B argument is that this is the logic of extinction in a world where we portray people as other and ultimately do not look out for their interests, but rather corporate interests. It will always justify corporations doing really messed up stuff to people, such as making them work to maquilas for under $1 a day. This is completely justified in a system where they are not calculable, which is exactly what this does. Black advocacy. United States federal government will repeal the Tyhart Amendment. The United States federal government will repeal the Tyhart Amendment.
Going for it, it's a plan.
It's your advocacy, I thought.
Yeah, whatever. Tomato, tomato. You can laugh. Solvency?
Ha-ha.
The Tyhart Amendment stops background checks from being destroyed within 24 hours after approval, allowing the falsified records to actually be examined and increase transparency. But the B argument is that repealing the amendment allows governments to require dealer inventory checks to detect the lost or stolen guns. This is crucial because in 2007, the ATF found 30,000 guns missing when they surveyed just 4.3% of dealers. The third argument is that repealing the amendment allows information about guns and illegal sales to be collected and released. This allows better information about guns in the United States for study. Specifically, we'll isolate how, look, even if you go to academia and try to write a paper about gun control legislation, you will never have accurate numbers because of this, which means that the information is not out to the general public, means you ultimately would stop coalition building. The fourth argument is that this plan provides a springboard for discussion and a larger interrogation of whiteness and gun culture. This is key for passing more effective gun legislation in the future and creating large movement. Look, we isolate that colleges are specifically key to this. If you write an academic paper, you cannot talk about the actual numbers because of this legislation. Actual numbers are key in interrogating the way in which we go after people of color. Damn, I have to stop from cursing. The implications. The first is going to be the prison-industrial complex. The A is that we construct the black, brown, or other bodies as dangerous. You can see how, look at the way in which we use rhetoric for mass shootings. If a mass shooter is white, and all of a sudden the man is crazy, but if a mass shooter is a person of color, they all of a sudden become terrorists, which means that we associate additional fears and harms on those bodies. The B argument is that this justifies going after people of color. You can see how cops literally find guns on white people twice as long, twice as much as they do on black people, but black people are 1.5 times more likely to be arrested if they have a gun found on them, which literally means that the way in which this legislation protects the police also protects the brutalities that the police commit against people necessarily bad. You can see how people of color are 30% of the actual population, but make up 60% of the prison population is mostly due to legislation like this and the way in which we enforce it. But do I have 1 minute, like 48 seconds, or 2?
You have 1 minute 48.
Okay. I wasn't sure. But additionally, our argument's going to be that you can see how even in the jury process, black people are literally sentenced up to like 10 to 20 times more depending on the type of legislation, which literally means that these things become cyclical in a world where you stay in jail. If you're in jail, that means that your wages are lower when you get out and it's harder to live on, but it is also necessarily unfair in a world where you become a felon and don't have access to public service. You can see how 1 in every 3 people in Florida, 1 in every 3 black males in Florida don't have access to public service, which is necessarily bad. In a world where you can't find a job because you've been labeled a felon, ultimately meaning poverty. Our argument is 1 year in poverty leads to the decrease in 7 years of your life, uniquely dehumanizing because you are more susceptible to diseases like Chagas and other diseases which are literally carried over through not having access to resources. These things could lead to things like pulmonary failure and death, ultimately all subject of the same systematic problem. The second impact is corporate control. You can cross-apply my analysis about the NRA isn't necessarily the keystone behind this. Our argument's going to be in a world where this happens. You can see how Citizens United has literally allowed for almost unlimited spending by these corporations, which means in a world where this happens, we value the voices of the businesses over the voices of the people. This ultimately links back to the logic of extinction, because in a world where this happens, it means we never solve back for the actual social problems, we only solve back for the perceived ones. This is necessarily bad because people of color aren't calculable under perceived notions of harm, so they're only, which means that accurate information is key to solving back for this, eliminating corporate control and eliminating the guise of actual justice in the system.
So far, so good on this point, right?
I tried really hard. I am trying really hard.
Yours is going to be one off. You're going to want multiple sheets of paper.
Okay. The longest tea in the universe.
We've done that before. Yeah, and it would fit too.
Are you going to go case in order at the bottom?
Yeah, case order on the bottom.
Sweet.
Alright, let's begin. Any use is a serious concessions on their context is going to cause some real problems in this debate round. First of all, we're going to go to the framework page. First of all, we look at how debate has to value the experience and make us better actors. We must evaluate all the planks of their context. And the point when they are advocating for something that's going to be inherently bad, we're going to talk about how that's going to be so. This is going to be a reason why you're going to reject their entire plan text. Also, the next argument in here is going to be that they must defend all of their plan advocacy and all the points of that plan. At the point when we're going to show you serious defaults in that and the impacts coming from their advocacy is going to be a reason why you're not going to vote for them. The third one is going to be that their planks are entirely fictional, to the point where they're never going to gain access to the fiat world through actually solving any kind of gender disparity or minority disparity. It means you're going to have to look at this round of the pre-fiat level, which is going to be the reason why you're going to prefer the criticism. The next argument under here is going to be that the fourth argument is going to be that this criticism precedes fairness. You can cross-apply their argumentation about how like procedurals lead to exclusion. We would argue that they have to focus on the standards of inequality. You can even cross-apply their own analysis about how we have to decolonize debate. Next argument we would make is just kind of a general thesis argument that Foucault makes the statement about how the nature and power of the state has changed recently. We have to reevaluate our own position in relationship with the state at the point when they do not fundamentally do this and they don't recognize their own complacency within the system. It's going to be a reason why you're going to reject them. Now on to the links page. First of all, first link. Gun control rights are inherently linked to biopolitical action. You can look specifically to Armenia, where after 4 years after they got rid of the guns, they killed 2 million Christian Turks. This is going to be a reason why after gun control legislation always leads to violence against minority subjects. The second one is going to be. You look specifically to pre-World War II and the Holocaust, where Germany took the guns away from the citizens, specifically those of the Jewish descent, which is going to be a reason why then it was able to justify the violence against them, also to carry out that violence. The third one is going to be here that the rhetoric of their use of fiat is always going to be isolating the state action, while they're actually trying to use the state to repeal the Tiahar Amendment. The fourth is going to be that the plan. You can look specifically at their impact analysis about how they're trying to decolonize debate and the minority action within that is going to be a reason why that they're trying to use this state, but they're not changing the fundamental relationship that these citizens have with their state government. The fifth one under here is going to be that their plan text stipulates what is, like, their whole advocacy stipulates what is actually like an acceptable way of life, and that when they're trying to create this system, in order to do that, it's going to be a reason why they link into this, because they're trying to create like this hierarchy of what is and isn't good, and it's going to be a reason why you're going to be able to reject them. Also, we would argue that their specific rhetoric of using the state to take the guns away is always going to be bad. Let's get to the, go ahead.
On 5, you said that we create an advocacy of what is acceptable life?
Yeah, of what is an acceptable way of living. Now onto the impacts page. The first is going to be this criticism always allows the justification of democide. You can look specifically to how without standing up to the state is always going to lead to the oppression by the state. You can look specifically to the number 1 argument on the number 1 and 2 on the links about how the state is able to carry out massive amounts of violence against its own citizens and those of other ones. This is going to be this is always going to be a reason why you're never going to prefer it, especially at the point when they are essentially getting rid of the guns and increasing gun control. It's going to be actually removing our ability to stand up to the state. It's going to be inherently a reason why you don't want this. The second is going to be the second impact here is going to be the nuclear war, because at the point when you make these people objects simply for your own, like, you're trying to use these minority groups in order to gain the ballot. At the point when they're doing that, that's another link as well. It's the reason why you're never going to be able to solve, because they're creating these objects out of these individuals just so that they can get the ballot. At that action, they become subjects. Like they no longer become human beings that have an inherent value of life. It's going to be a reason why it justifies the state's nuclear annihilation of them. The third impact under here is going to be that of fourth generation weapons. The state is continually developing more and more weapons that are increasingly violent, even though they already have annihilation capabilities, which is the reason why that we have to stand at the state now. The fourth impact is going to be that they specifically try to justify their action through the use of the corporations, and the corporations' actions is going to actually inherently lead back into making them cogs in the machine, which is always going to be a reason why you're going to reject them. And the last one here is going to be that when humans are no longer humans and they become subject and objects, is always going to lead to torture. You're also going to look to have specifically this Turns case as effectively, because they're never going to be able to actually solve for the decolonization of debate, nor solve for any of these minority groups at the point when they're always going to be, the state is always going to be able to exercise violence against them. Now, on the alternative. Text. Vote negative to reject the biopolitics of the affirmative plan. Once again, vote negative to reject the biopolitics of the affirmative plan. The competition, little land here, is going to be that this is mutually exclusive because, go ahead, you question.
Sure, what's your interpretation of biopolitics?
I feel that that's already made clear on the framework in the pieces page. Our interpretation of biopolitics is that you don't fundamentally change the way that the state interacts with its citizenry, and that you are exercising state control over its citizens. The other here is going to be that they're mutually exclusive because the plan is philosophical, and the point when they're making the citizens, they're making them subjects. This is that it competes on a philosophical level. We would also argue that this is a net beneficial comparison if you even want to go there, although that's not going to be completely necessary, because at the point when the criticism avoids the ideological justification of state action, which is going to be a key thing. There's also a solvency point. Next is going to be that any perms would be severance out of their original advocacy of using the state and using the state to control individuals. And the next perm is going to be that it would also that all perms would be philosophical severance at the very least. The third is going to be the solvency. The little one under here is going to you have to have reflexive self-interest. You have to specifically look at how criticisms are a way that analyze thought, and at the point when when we recognize our own place in the system and we have to stand up to the state, there's going to be a reason why we have to, why this alternative is going to be able to solve. The next one down here is going to be the resistance equals standing up to against power structures, and this leads to us viewing ourselves as proactive actors. This is always going to be able to, once you reject biopolitics of the affirmative plan, you're going to be able to see us standing up to the state. Is going to be able to check back against all the impacts, how we are able to solve that. The little standard here is going to be that it stops excessive power in a totalizing fashion, because the state doesn't have. Specifically, how the state doesn't have to cease existing, it just has to stop dominating the lives of its citizenry. You can look specifically how we can realize ourselves as subjects and stand up against injustice and violence, and that's how we're going to be able to solve. Now, on to case. The first argument I want to make here is that this is going to be a term because it's going to actually allow the state to co-opt their use of the state is always going to increase the oppression of minorities, because at the point when the state now knows where all these guns are, they don't inherently solve for onto their solvency, onto their case, wherever you want to solve it. You can look specifically how the state's going to co-opt that movement, because at the point when they don't actually solve for racism inherently in the state, when the state uses this to be able to track guns, it's only going to allow the police officers, which inherently racist, they don't solve for, to be able to track these guns and place them on the minorities. It's always going to allow for the corruption and racism in the system to reify itself against these minorities, which is the reason why they're never going to be able to decolonize debate or decolonize or end the oppression of the minorities. The next one under here is going to be that their use of the biopolitics is always going to justify further state action. It's only going to entrench the state more against the oppression of minorities, which is always going to be a reason why they're going to link back into it. Also, specifically on their impacts, number one, we argue that they don't have any access to this because they're only allowing for the justification of more minority violence. You can look at how the state is only going to be able to co-opt into this idea and then use the guns to further oppress minorities and suppress by the impacts. Also, their corporate capitalism isn't very well articulated or internalized at the point when we would argue that the state is always going to be able to control goods.
Both their impacts are because of the state.
And both their impacts result because of the state. We solve back for that. The case is the only way to solve your case.
All right, I want case in order. I want their criticism, the alt on top. Oh yeah, I like sitting. I'm short and it's easier. And then I want their links. Their framework, their impacts, their thesis. So I'll signpost. Do you need me to repeat? Yeah. So our case in order with framework on top. Y'all's alt. Your links, your framework, your impacts, your thesis.
Hey, Matt, quick question. Do you have all the F case and net case loaded on one tab?
Yes,
Cool. I'll just let you know where I'm at.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah. These aren't really big desks.
Sure.
Everyone good? It's going to be really easy for any unit in World War A. They do not understand what biopolitical control means, but additionally they can see the entirety of the framework. I'm going to go there now. They can see arguments about why I have to engage in structural violence in a world where their criticism doesn't mean structural violence because it doesn't engage with specifically marginalized populations. It talks about generic attempts of biopolitical control. They don't have specific population isolated. That's always a reason they would not be functional under our framework. But additionally, they can see arguments about why we are obligated as the privileged individuals to try and break down system oppressions in ways that we have access to. But most importantly in this, they concede arguments, the number 5 point, which is that we are not an endorsement of the state in its current existence. We are attempting to reimagine a less violent state, which is going to get us out of all of the links to the criticism. They also concede arguments about why it's uniquely good to try and reimagine the state as less violent because 50% of policymakers have some kind of debate experience, not right now, which is always a reason that we have to decolonize the space of debate because those individuals are going to end up in policy situations. Which is a reason that we have unique access to change out of ground, which means none of your fiat arguments are going to be applicable. Anything else you want? Cool. They can see the entirety of the background, which means we think you're going to be able to leverage the thesis of the criticism against their thesis. They don't specifically interrogate whiteness or within this or not even have a specific argument about gun control. Always a reason that they would continually not interrogate or engage in whiteness. Always a reason they would replicate the exclusion that we're talking about in the status quo and a reason they have no propensity to solve. All right. Plan. They say that now the state's going to know where guns are, but they fundamentally misunderstand what our solvency is doing. This allows the state to know if guns have been lost or have been sold or if documents have been falsified, which means that they don't necessarily know where the guns are, but we can actually start to interrogate where the guns distribution is. But even if they knew where they are, that's always going to be uniquely good in this instance. They say it's going to create corruption, but argument's going to be in a world they concede that actually white individuals have gun ownership rates at 2 times the amount. If we can actually have access to that information or more information about that, that would always check back against corruption because now we have actual data to back this up, which means we check back against the minority abuses that we're talking about, which is how we solve. They also concede arguments about number 3, number 4 point. This creates a larger movement interrogation of whiteness, which we argue is part of the root of gun culture, right? And you can look at examples of how individuals, the impact level about rhetoric about how mass shooters are terrorists if they are a person of color, but they are crazy if they are white, and that means so they need social help. Probably a reason that we check back against this argument. They say that ways to create further biopolitics through state action. They also say on their alternative that we don't have to get rid of the state, just change our relationship to it, and when they concede arguments about why we change our relationship to the state is game over on solvency. IMX. They say that we have more minority violence that's going to co-opt in this further because the state, you can cross the arguments I already made about why that's true. They don't have a single warrant about why this co-optation is going to happen. The argument's going to be that this is not unique. We at least have a much higher propensity or risk of solving back for this. They don't have any interrogation of that. We check, and they say this is the corporate controls because of the state, but the argument's going to be that in a world where we can use the state to check back, well, corporate against this, you should not have conceded that framework point.
Question.
Sure.
So how does this idea that like the police suppress minorities now make it like the criticism non-unique?
What?
You said specifically that it's non-unique because you have like the only propensity for
We
solve the
solved
same
that
problem.
through the plan. That's the point. Like, alternative. Oh, can I get our plan, thanks, Steve? All right. My first argument here is going to be you don't provide any reason why rejection is uniquely key or even a ballot story for this alternative. Probably a reason that we can get access to the permutation here. I'm going to go there now. The first is the United States federal government will repeal the entire amendment and vote to reject the biopolitics of the AF plan. Or the plan. Our argument's going to be that there's no unique reason that we have the rejection is particularly key, particularly rejecting the plan. We say that especially when we get rid of the vote nay part of it, but additionally we say we solve back for all of the biopolitical arguments better, where we actually provide a way to reimagine our relationship to the state, but additionally they still do not provide a clear interpretation about what biopolitics means. They simply says it's changing our relationship, but biopolitics also has an idea of internal surveillance and control. You don't check back against internal surveillance and control of the state, probably a reason that people would still self-regulate under biopolitics, and a reason you don't provide a clear interpretation of that will always a reason we solve back better against this. But additionally, they say there's not we say the permutation has a couple of unique net benefits. We say that you cannot solve for whiteness, particularly in a world where you engage in a purely theoretical framework, which is always a reason that you would also not solve back. But additionally, you have Foucault has also said that power is inevitable, and biopolitical power is going to uniquely happen. Always a reason you have no propensity to solve back for this. He also doesn't necessarily indict power as bad, which is why he doesn't provide an alternative in a lot of his works. Always a reason that you would not be able to solve back for any of the thesis of your criticism on philosophical competition. They don't provide interpretation to what this means. I don't know what philosophical competition is. Do we all sit around and like read some Marx and like this doesn't make any sense. Which is probably a reason you're not evaluating. We say we're philosophically competitive in a world where we engage in interrogating whiteness and you have no vested interest in interrogating that whiteness. It's always a reason you solve back for this. They say they just avoid the justification of the affirmative argument is going to be that in a world where you concede arguments about why the state is uniquely good in this instance and why it's the only thing that can solve and why imagining the state is less violent is good for individuals, particularly individuals who have been excluded in the status quo. That means their voices are allowed to be heard in a forum where they are not heard now, which means we are not a severance permutation. We are still going for advocacy. We go for the entirety of the affirmative and all non-competitive parts of the alternative. Always a reason that we solve back. On the solvency. They say that we have to have reflexive self-interest and that resistance is key, but they don't explain why that resistance has to take the unique form of rejecting the affirmative. We say we're the only ones who provide a clear ballot story, which is that you have to look at the creating ethical norms in debate, which is always a reason that we solve back better for all of your argumentation here. But they also don't explain what reflexive self-interest would mean or really any of the solvency. We say that we can solve back for all of these arguments when we interrogate whiteness, which means we are being reflexive about our privilege, which means we solve back for reflexivity much better than you do, which means the affirmative is the only way to solve back for the impacts of the alternative. Anything else you want?
No.
Cool. And they don't stop excessive power. Like the state still exists. Foucault would probably agree. Yes. They say that gun control laws are always going to be uniquely bad, and that's why it's a tool of biopolitical control. But our argument's going to be that we actually are repealing one of these laws. That's the point of the affirmative. It's just a bad law, probably a late turn for this position. They also say that in the Holocaust, they talk about how Germany took guns away. Our argument's going to be that we allow the tracking of guns as well, or not the tracking of guns, but like the ability to understand how many guns are being placed in illegal markets, which is always uniquely good because we can check back against violence and communities and functions as a turn against this, because individuals are no longer being marginalized or being viewed as others simply because they are happen to be people of color. That's a better internal link to all of your Holocaust arguments than your gun argument, which is always the reason we are linked into this position. They say that we fought state action argument is going to be that we solve back by creating a reimagined state. They concede this argument, which is the reason we have a propensity to solve. They say that we don't change our fundamental relationship to the state. Argument is going to be the rejection in this room doesn't change your fundamental relationship to the state either. We actually do by creating critical interrogation of laws that happen that we can actually affect in the future and have it linked that some individuals in this room might affect in the future, which is always the reason we solve back better and are linked to this position. They say that we have an acceptable way of life. Argument's going to be that we are not saying that certain ways of life are unacceptable. Murdering people for being people of color is not cool. So I don't care. Framework. They say that the R of their framework is that flanks are fictional and we have to defend all of it. We do. This doesn't function as offense. It doesn't even function as impact calculus, quite frankly. Anything else we need there? impacts. The only other argument I want here is the nuclear war. Oh, I ran out of time. But they don't have their internal lists.
All right. All right, let's do their framework on top, followed by Link's thesis, or sorry, followed by thesis. I have them on the same page.
Our thesis.
Sorry, no, our thesis.
What is it?
Forgot using this. Yeah, I'll start over. Their framework, followed by our links, followed by our alternative, impacts, our impacts as well, and then background advantage of the affirmative team. Cool. So your framework, our links, and our alternative impacts, and then the background of the background advantage. Cool.
Okay, so you mean the plan, because we don't use a traditional advantage structure, so.
I know. Background and then like links, impact, I guess.
Okay.
All right,
I mean,
just sign that.
Sure.
yeah, hopefully it'll be clear, but you never know. I never know. On the framework in particular, I don't think any of their reasons or any of their arguments are reason to exclude the negative team. That they say that like biopolitics doesn't solve for decolonization. However, this is irrelevant. We operate under their framework. We solve for the structural inequalities by decolonizing debate. Therefore, there's a reason that the framework debate will be a wash, and eventually it'll force the question of the links impact debate, which we're going to win there. Number two here is that we don't engage with the marginalization. However, we do engage with the marginalization. Our argument is that the state creates marginalized people, and therefore we do engage with them. Furthermore, when you can see the impact page, you're going to see that we engage them on that level. Next argument they make is that we must break down privacy now. However, their plan increases privacy, and our plan actually breaks it down. So you're going to see that that's a net benefit of the plan. Next argument they make is that they're not an endorsement of state. However, you're going to see on the links page, it doesn't matter if they're endorsing past state actions. The important argument is that they are actually engaging in action right now in this debate room that is going to link them to the criticism, meaning that they don't need to defend all historical USFG action, but they do need to defend their particular action, which we're going to win is bad. They say that the rule of the ballot is currency. That's fine. We are going to compete for this currency, their framework. We all really shouldn't have even read a framework page. Our criticism operates within their framework. We have a conceded argument that our impacts turn their case, so therefore we're engaging in the debate that way. Links. Their first response is that they're not repealing gun control. However, I think this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the T-Hart Amendment. What this does is it's going to allow increased gun control, increased observation of individuals with guns, and increased amount of knowledge the government has of where these guns are. This is important when you look to our historical analysis on the links page, where we're telling you examples of when the government has used knowledge such as this to invade people's privacy, which ultimately led to genocide. That means we have a direct internal link to their impacts. When they don't get to our impact page and only say that we don't have an internal link, and we are giving it to you right here, I think that's a problem. They don't answer it. They say that they don't allow first she says they allow tracking, and then she says no, they don't. But the first one is correct. They do allow tracking. That's what the plan is going to allow gun tracking, meaning they're straight up linking into this position. The next argument they make is that they don't solve. The affirmative team solves back their use of fiat. However, we're indicting their particular use of fiat. So the fact that they're solving for fiat in general doesn't matter, because we're saying in this particular instance of fiat is bad. They say the alternative doesn't solve relationship with the state. However, it has a propensity to solve. Furthermore, we're just going to outweigh on the links and impacts level. So even if we don't solve, we're going to be still voting for the negative. Then they say that murdering people because they're a different color is definitely not cool. We agree. Our argument here is that the plan would increase the propensity of this happening, and therefore we are turning it. Look to the number 6. I want you to extend that. It's a straightforward argument that they are taking people's guns away by increasing the amount that are going to be observed, and then decreasing their ability to buy guns, keep guns. This is going to be straight up linking the opposition. Furthermore, just extend the arguments, not this time, extend the arguments about how the Holocaust, the genocide of the Turks have been examples of where this has happened in the past. Argument is this is a first step down that slippery slope, and this is a problem. Let's go to the impact. Not this time. I got a lot to get to, especially on this page. All right, so. Okay, I'll answer the rejections later. Their first argument is a permutation, vote to reject the plan and the biopolitics, or do plan and vote to reject the biopolitics of plan. First response is that the links are specific disadvantages to this. So when we tell you that they're increasing the increased propensity of genocide, such as in the Turkish example, then you're going to see that this is a direct disadvantage to this permutation. Next argument is the permutations doesn't solve because it is they say reject the biopolitics of plan, meaning that the permutation would be contradictory, would never solve. Furthermore, it would never access our rejection arguments because they're not rejecting the plan. They're actually saying that it's bad and then doing it anyways, which means you actually it would be a net detriment to the permutation. What else on the perm?
Just the, yeah, that's good. It's the social cognitive because they're component of addiction.
Next argument is the plan of severance because it doesn't have the entirety of the negative text. Mitchell tells you this must have the negative text in the LOC. This is the conceded argument extended now. Their number 2 here is that they don't give us any reason that rejection is key. Let's answer that now. Argument is here that self-reflection and inspection is key. We must recognize a rule we have via the state and stand up to it and oppose it. This is the reason that particular rejection in this round is key because we are opposing state action that leads to biopolitical control. This is the unique solvency we're garnering there. Let's go to the line by line. They say they don't allow biopolitics is a surveillance of people. Yes. That's a great definition. Their plan allows for the surveillance of people because now everybody knows exactly what caliber gun they have and where they keep it, which is a problem. And specifically the government knows this, therefore they are increasing surveillance of the people. The next argument is that there's no unique net benefit because the framework doesn't solve. The framework is entirely irrelevant. We solve for biopolitical control, which you're conceding is a turn to your case, meaning that if we win the links in the impacts page, we win this debate. They say they don't know what this means, however, you give us a pretty good definition. Furthermore, you can look to Mitchell's thesis page where he tells he quotes Foucault as an answer to this, meaning it's not a reason you're going to vote against the negative team simply because they have a better definition of what Foucault is, because Alyssa probably reads a lot of this stuff. I wouldn't be surprised. It's a good thing. But the next argument is why is rejection key? I've already answered this. Furthermore, extend the last argument Mitchell's making on solvency number 4 that we stop the totalizing state, meaning like we are reconceptualizing our behavior to the state and acting in opposition to it. This is the reason rejection is key because we are particularly rejecting this particular instance. They say it's only this instance and it's good in this instance, but they don't give you any reason that this instance is good, and we're going to be straight turning you on the impact level. Impacts. All right. Extend all the impacts. I mean, extend the argument that biopolitical control leads to genocide, it leads to nuclear war, fourth generation weapons, and use of corporation. This is a straight turn to their case, Matthew, because their impacts are they solve for violence, prison industrial complex, and corporate control. And we are straight turning this because we are saying that the gun control legislation is going to allow more people to be put in jail because of the gun control laws. And furthermore, our argument is that they're making arguments that the corporate has control over the state and the status quo, which is another reason that the state is bad, which also functions as a turn because we're decreasing the state, which their argument is the corporate control. Our argument here is that this is internal link to corporate control, is the state and them having like access to government, and being able to make laws and act through the government is the ultimate form of capitalism. This is what Chris Hedges talks about in his book Abandonment Zones. This is where ultimately capitalism is going, and we solve for this. Therefore, we solve for the root cause of their impacts, which is a straight turn to case.
Go back to the states.
Okay. Go back to the alternative, please. They say that the state still exists, however, by reconceptualizing our relationship with the state, we challenge the state. This brings us into it, this fundamentally changes our relationship with the state from as obedient and as being able to be divided up and controlled in this manner as to somebody who's in opposition and therefore has a propensity to solve and break down. Even if we don't break down all instances of the state, we break down this particular instance. If we're winning as bad, this criticism will essentially function as a disadvantage. Onto their background. I want you to extend Mitchell's argument that the state uses biopolitical control to track people. Here's how this is going to break down. We're saying that the state uses guns to track people. They're saying, yeah, but more white people have guns, but they're making arguments that the cops will never prosecute white people. So in a world where you're able to trace everybody and the cops are only prosecuting white people, then this is still going to increase the amount of minorities who are prosecuted. This is how we are interacting with their framework. This is a straight turn to their case. The answers in the MG are not sufficient. They say only know where buy and sold. However, no, this is a tracing program, meaning that they're going to know where these guns are bought, sold, and kept at all times. Furthermore, their own analysis is talking about how any kind of buying and selling would be reported to the state. So that means that instance somebody who the state doesn't want to have a gun and gets one, they would know instantly about it and be able to prosecute them. Their own analysis is proving this is going to be minority suspects and therefore is going to increase racism, which means we have a better internal link to solving for racism via biopolitical control than the AF does. They say that like the rest of the analysis there is irrelevant. They say the social programs are like the distinction. However, I think we just have a better internal link to solving for racism. Therefore, like them proving that racism exists is not relevant to this debate. They say that yeah, okay. Furthermore, just extend Mitchell's argument that it justifies further state action and that is bad. This is a slippery slope. As long in a world where we allow the state to continue to do this, eventually democide will happen. This is our nuclear war impacts and the reason that you're going to be voting for the affirmative on the case. They just don't solve. Extend Mitchell's arguments.
Going for the podium.
Yeah, girl.
Hey. You're just going to be a brief overview, you can flow it, and then it'll be the alternative, the impacts. Oh no, I want links before the impacts.
Well, you want what before the effects?
I want links, so our, like our all page, our links page, our impacts page, and then there's this.
Case in order.
Yeah.
Sweet.
All right, Matt, this is a real easy decision for you and RBG at the point when we're going to be able, where we are the internal link to their solvency, both because we allow for the minorities to stand up against the state and the oppression that exists, and also because they never solve back for the oppression, and that the state will just reify itself in the knowledge of where the guns exist. You can also look at this criticism as a functionally a disadvantaged case about why you wouldn't want to do this, and that's going to be also a reason why you're going to vote for UNRPG. They might try to go for some arguments in here about in the PMR about how they're not the state and how they don't like how the negative team doesn't solve for whiteness, but at the point when we are the internal link to their solvency, also about how they do engage in state action, and there's going to be still reasons why you reject it. Also, you're never going to get access to the perm, but we'll get to that on the alt page right now. Specifically, you're going to look to Somerset's analysis about how the perm is severance, about how it severs out from the original adequacy, because now they're saying that they're using the state and saying that it's bad. It's also going to be a reason why they're never going to be able to solve. That's going to be key in this debate round. So the perm has no access to solvency because they don't reject, also because they don't reject the state. At that point they can never redefine themselves. Also, we'd argue that they can't. The alternative just doesn't. The perm doesn't function well because they're trying to reify the state's power as well as to decrease it. It's never going to work, and they provide no analysis of why that's going to be key. Also, you're going to look to all of the analysis about how they never solve for biopolitical control, especially at the point when their plan puts that into place. It's going to be a reason why the perm's not going to flow through this debate round, and the reason why you can vote for the negative team. We are the only ones who are going to be able to solve for the biopolitical action of the state. Onto the links page. The most important link that we need here is going to be essentially this idea that they are increasing state control by giving the state the ability to track where the guns are and knowledge of where all the guns existed within the United States. That's going to be a key reason for why we're going to see the impacts. They just do not have good enough answers on this. Their turns do not function as turns because you look at Somerset's analysis of how they are in fact allowing tracking. Specifically, that's what the THART does, or prevented, and they're repealing that. You can also look specifically how they are increasing the amount of gun control that the state has over them. You can look to our analysis that goes dropped about how that is the internal link to violence and genocide in Armenia and in Germany. It's going to be a reason why we're going to see that that's going to occur here. But you can also specifically look to the last link, which goes dropped, about how they're increasing government authority, and that's always going to be a reason why they're going to link. They have no offense in this position, and you're not going to allow them any clarification in the PMR. That means that we get full access to these impacts. These impacts are essentially turn cases. It's going to be a reason why you're never going to vote for them, because they're never going to be able to solve the oppression of minorities or solve back for whiteness, because of the point when we control the democide as well as the torture that will occur post-plan. It's going to be a reason why you're always going to be able to vote for UNRBG. Specifically, onto the frameworks page, they might try to go for this idea that somehow that within their framework that we don't fit, that our criticism doesn't fit, but at the point when we are decolonizing the world as well as debate because of our rhetorical speech act, it's going to be a reason why we're going to be able to solve also why we fit within their framework. Specifically, though, you can look to how they are engaging in state action right now. You can look specifically at their plan text about what they're trying to do, and that's always going to be a reason why you're never going to be able to vote for them. When we control the internal link to solving for minority oppression, because in the world of plan, the state is then going to use all of that knowledge to continue to oppress the minorities. They don't solve for the police bias, and the point when we stand up to the state and we allow these individuals to reject that oppression is always going to be a reason why we solve. Extend across Somerset's analysis about how cops will continue to not persecute white people and persecute those minorities. We have to stand up to the state. It's the only way to solve. We are the internal link to any kind of impacts that they would try to garner.
All right, Brandon, 5 minutes for 30 speaking points. You talk about
I laugh because I don't
so
believe
hard
that.
not to swear.
I know. It gets increasing.
Non-body boss.
I mean, Caitlin would be pretty impressed if you can pull it off.
Oh,
to be
she'd be
honest.
impressed just that I got to do the PMCs. Her, links, the impact arguments, our framework, our advocacy, our impacts. So what I meant by impacts firsthand was I'm gonna go on there. I float the impact arguments, and then we don't solve for all that on their impacts. I have that about time blank. So the impact arguments go earlier, and then our impacts clean up the For sure. Ready, Matt? Conceding that power is inevitable is probably a reason why we win permutation here. On the permutation, there's a few arguments as to why the permutation is viable in this round. The first argument is you can see that power is inevitable and that biopolitical power is inevitable. You can see in the analysis that people would always self-regulate, which is probably a reason as to why increased surveillance doesn't change this. It's probably a reason as to why you would have to pass the plan in order to have the movements that we talk about in the solvency, specifically when academics can use this research and then we can actually analyze the numbers that probably solve back for all your surveillance arguments better, but additionally we would also solve back for biopolitical control because that's inevitable. At least the permutation would give us an opportunity to interrogate it within the plan text, something that the argument just simply does not do. Look, as an underview, in a world where biopolitical control is inevitable and people self-regulate, then you have to have movement in order to solve back for this. They don't garner movement, any sort of movement building. They conceded on our plan text, reason why the perm solves here. Additionally, on the mutual exclusivity, they go for this argument that ultimately we can never solve because we can never redefine ourselves, but that doesn't matter in a world where you can see the framework arguments that say that we do not endorse previous representations and practices. You do not do a good enough job on the link story as to why this uniqueness is so atrocious. It's probably a reason as to why we should be given access to do this. You also can see the fact that our framework argument has out-of-round implications because debaters actually go on to do things like social change and have this influence, which means in a world where we can shape the debate now and here is more important because it has out-of-round implications. It's something you do not garner. It's unique that benefit for the permutation. Anything else?
Yeah, answer the per con arc.
Oh yeah, they say that we're a performative contradiction because we acknowledge there's biopolitical control and then still use it, but you can see biopolitical control is inevitable.
No, the argument is they say because the word AF plan is in it, but there's nothing that says reject of the
Either way, you also can see the argument. There's no independent reason why rejecting the team is necessary. You just say rejecting is necessary. We reject as well. There's no reason why you have to reject us. Reason why this is not a perf con. Better. Sure. Impact. They say we don't solve for whiteness and could never solve back for minorities, but too bad you can see the arguments as for the self-seeing where we would necessarily have movement building and that movement building is necessarily solved, keep solving back for larger studies, but additionally you also can see the fact that repealing amendment allows for information to be distributed through academia and other places, which is currently not allowed, that only cops now have this information. There's probably a reason why access to the general public solves back for your whiteness arguments better. There's no internal link that you have that you can solve back for this other than biopolitical control, but you can't even solve for that either because that is inevitable, which means that
Point of
also...
order. I think an analysis about how only the cops have the information now, isn't it?
It's conceded as per the background. I mean, I'm sure you can check the file later.
It's in the.
Let me look.
This is on their impacts, right?
Oh, on their, yeah, I mean, he's just
Alright.
talking about the case and comparing it, making that argument in the solvency.
Yeah. I mean, our argument as per the background, if I can find it, because I didn't really put it in our argument. We say, oh yeah, that we talk about in the background specifically how the police are the only ones who have access, that it is the academics don't have access to published information, therefore the public doesn't have access to the information, we don't stop social movement building. I think that's the argument I'm going for. And fidelity. I'm sure it's under consideration.
Yeah, I'll think about it later.
Alright, sure. Then they go hard for this argument that they solve back for capitalism, which is ultimately solving back for the root cause. I don't think they do enough analysis to ask why they would solve back for capitalism in a world where they just eliminate biopolitical control, even if you're granting them that. But I think we would solve back for capitalism even better if that is the root cause in a world where we have social movement building.
Point of order.
Cap arts are new.
The cap arts are definitely new.
Yeah, your cap arcs were new is what you just said.
Yeah.
It's like, I agree, they're all new cap arcs.
Yeah.
They're good arcs though, but like they all have
Cap
been
arcs are
after
in
the MG.
You didn't have that as number 4 on the LOC impact page?
Number 4 on my LLC impact page is that we justify action through the use of corporations and that people become impacts on the machine. That is your LLC impact argument.
I mean, I see where you're coming from with the cap on that argument. I see where you're
That was
coming from.
the Turns case argument.
No, your turn's case was it can't solve the decolonization of debate, blah, blah, blah. You had that above that.
Yeah.
Justifying use via the use of corporations leads back into make them cogs in the machine, so we should reject. Oh, man. I mean, I see why you think that's a new response. I think you should have been extending that argument as opposed to like go to that specific thing, extending that as that argument just for future, but I'm leaning with you until he talks.
My response is there's no internal link analysis in the shell. The shell's argument is that they become cogs in the machine, not that capitalism is the internal link to suffering and they solve for capitalism. I'm answering the internal link analysis, which is the internal link to our AF. That is new analysis in the black.
Yeah, I'm gonna think about that one later too.
Sweet. Ultimately, we saw back to capitalism in the world, we have large movement building because this means that the perceptions of the people and the people who go through this can voice their opinions. It's something that currently doesn't happen now. You can see that this would happen, which means that we can always ultimately solve back to capitalism either by not participating in it or by having more ethical forms of capitalism, which is ultimately always going to be better for solving back for whiteness, something you would never garner through the time. The advocacy, what?
You should go for the arguments that they can see that we are the internal link because of the otherization of people of color, not taking away guns.
Oh yeah, well, I have to. Ultimately, like yeah, we are the internal link because we don't take away guns. On links, that's why I'm gonna answer it there. On links. They're going more for this argument about how they allow state tracking and that this would ultimately mean that the cops have more. Look, you can see the arguments that the cops currently are the only ones who can track and that there's no public access to this information. You can see the public access is key to movement building, which probably means that even if there is increased tracking, there's also increased resistance to that tracking, something that's not happening in the status quo. And probably the reason as to why we would always fall back to this, but you say this is in the internal link to violent genocide. You can see it as per our background that the logic of genocide only stems from the fact when we can otherize people. In a world where we have information and can break down these things, as Alyssa says, we can form more ethical relationships and understandings as to how the systems work. That is the only way to solve back for the logic of genocide because this is the only way to stop otherizing people and considering them others. That is literally the internal link story we're going for. They say that we increase government authority, but in a world where we have a more ethical government and we can reformulate the government, it means that this is not always necessarily bad. On our advocacy proper. You can see arguments as to why the state would only know that guns were lost. There's probably a reason that's what we get out of this. But additionally, you don't interrogate whiteness, which means in a specific context, which means that that's also a unique benefit to the permutation. You can see it as per our framework that in a world that you have to isolate specific populations because that way we can interrogate the structural violence that happens on their bodies. That is something you do not garner in this conceded argument. This is important for the round and also this is the biggest impact because when we're talking about things like the prison industrial complex and isolating specific populations, that's how we get the most tangible. Just saying that this increase in genocide or using these big flashy words does not accurately represent the situations that are happening here. This is the only way in which we can do this because in a world where we view this situation in this way, we can start to view these people as people and not objects through a system. That is exactly how you would solve back for the logic of genocide by having a more in-depth understanding and viewing people as autonomous agents as opposed to just a biopolitical sphere.
Gotta get the hug.